and welcome to episode 102 of Did You Bring the Hummus podcast. I'm Kimberly, your host, and I'm super excited to be here with you today. Did You Bring the Hummus is a podcast for all things vegan. Episodes post every Monday on your favorite podcast app. Before we get started, I have one very important question for you. Did you bring the hummus? Do you love the podcast? Want to help me keep it going? Visit the Support the Podcast tab on my website to learn more. Join me on alternating Mondays and Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern for an hour of meditation. Sign-up options include individual sessions, a monthly subscription, or a 10-session package good for 6 months. I have joined forces with Jennifer Shlomovich of The Confident Vegan on a new project, That Vegan Morning Show, which airs on YouTube every Monday at 7 a.m. Eastern. Join our mailing list and get a free recipe ebook of some of our favorites. Today, I am joined by behavioral change specialist Karen Bartle. Karen's focus is on supporting people to identify and implement evidence-based behavioral solutions to make and maintain sustainable life change. Karen is passionate about sharing her insights and wisdom from her own journey, as well as from a professional and clinical perspective of behavioral and dietary change, through appearing on podcasts, guest speaking, webinars, blogs, and more. In this episode, Karen shares her vegan journey, the cycle of change, and tips on how to change your behavior to get the outcomes you want. And of course, hummus. Hey, Karen, welcome. Thanks so much for joining me.
It's a pleasure to join you, and thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, of course. We've talked on and off a couple of times, so I'm glad that we're finally here. I am a firm believer in that these things happen when they're meant to. So I am confident it'll be a wonderful conversation and we'll really enjoy hanging out together.
I hope
Karen,
so.
as we always start here, did you bring the hummus? Tell me about your vegan journey. What brought you to this moment?
Okay, it's quite a protracted one. I'm going to warn you in advance. Because where I am now is kind of, or what I do now, should I say, is kind of very aligned with how I was brought up, but for different reasons. So I was born into a family of five, the youngest of five, and we were all omnivores, I think we had a pretty healthy diet, to be honest. And Mum would always make sure that we ate fruit, veg, meat, we had dairy, and we had a whole complement of stuff in our diet. So it wasn't that it was an unhealthy diet. Um, we always had a Sunday roast, family Sunday roast. And we were always encouraged to eat everything on our plate, and that will kind of be informed in a little while as to why that is. But we were always encouraged to eat the meat last. And this is something which I found later was a little bit weird. But, and I know where that came from. That came from the fact that my folks, my parents, were born um, they were born in 1938, so they were born in the silent generation, what was called the traditionalist generation, where they did what they were told, they respected authority, they respected their elders, and it was a hard time. It was a difficult time pre-war, and they had to make everything last. They didn't have a lot of food to eat, and nothing got wasted. Everything was used and stored and used well past its sell-by date. And the bit that was on the plate was prized was the meat, because that was the most expensive. It's the thing that got cooked the longest. You had to go and get that from places where you couldn't get other foods. Um, and I lived to that kind of guideline until I was about 8 or 9. And I went to a friend's house, and they invited me to stay for dinner. And she had two older sisters, and there was Mum and Dad there, and we were sat around this big round table. She was more middle classy than I was. I came from a very lower working class family in a very industrial city in England. called Sheffield, which was the steel city, the place where steel was made. And we didn't have a lot of money. We were pretty poor, but going to her house, it was kind of, it was great because she had a table. We never had a table. We always had to sit with our meals on our knees, even with the gravy kind of soaking everything up on the plate. And I remember sitting at their table, and I was eating all the good stuff, the potatoes, the veg and everything. And the meat was the last thing on my plate. And my friend's mum, she just stared at me and said, "Hey, Karen, what's wrong with the meat?" And I said, "Oh, we have to save that to last." And obviously they'd all eaten this first. So
Mm.
she said, "What, don't you like it, meat? Is it not good?" And then I had all these eyes staring at me, and I was so embarrassed because I was brought up I was a very little shy kid, a very little small shy kid. Had a lot of illness, and I kind of was so embarrassed at this idea that I was the only one, and everybody was looking at me, and I felt really ashamed of that.
Yeah.
But that was the first lesson that I had, that what was going on in my family wasn't particularly what was going on in other people's families. I thought that was the norm.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, that was the first lesson I think that I learned with that from a working class background, the meat was very prized, and the fact that my parents were born into that era, it was very important
Mhm.
to have that meat on that plate. Um, my mum also was, and her nan, her mum, my nan as well, um, were very fond of using everything. So they would use all the offal and everything. They would buy tripe and cow
Mm.
from the fish markets.
Mhm.
Um, my nan would always be very fond of cooking pig's trotters and things like that. And I was never game for any of that. I would never entertain it. I didn't like the smell of it. It was disgusting. It was the worst thing ever for me. I couldn't get involved in that. And so that from that very first very young age, I realized that I didn't like the idea of eating animals,
Mm.
or dead animals in particular. And it grossed me out, to be honest. Even when we went to the fish and meat markets to buy, the Sunday roast, it pretty much grossed me out, just the smell of it. And I don't know where that came from, because none of my other siblings or my parents had that same feeling. Maybe because I was the youngest. I was born in the 70s, and it was of an era of change in a lot of ways.
Mhm.
But I just, I grossed out by it. But anyway, I continued to be an omnivore through my teens. A lot of hedonism in through my 20s, of course, partying and sex, drugs, and rock and roll and all that. Going to university and college, and as you do in your
Yeah,
20s, you have a
of
good
course.
time. So there was a lot of. I didn't care for very much other than studying and playing in bands and stuff like that. Um, but when I hit my 30s, something changed, and it wasn't just me, because I'd been going out with someone who lived on the same street. In fact, only 3 doors away from me. When I was 14, he was 15. Went to different schools, but um, we both had the same common interests and mentality and mindset and everything. So we did everything together. We were like glued together. And that went right through our 20s
Mm.
and 30s. And we're next year, we're going to be um, celebrating our 40th anniversary together.
Wow.
So we've kind of been together for so long, and we've
Yeah.
supported each other through thick and thin, through all the things that we've been through. We've been through a lot of challenges. But we both decided we'd moved into I think it was our second home then. We'd earned quite a bit of money. We'd got good jobs. In fact, we got a business, really successful business. Um, and just something changed. We both had been eating meat and dairy obviously that was 3 decades by that point. But we just something just told us. I don't know. I can't even remember what the trigger was, but something just told us that it wasn't right to do to keep continue eating meat. We didn't like the feel of it, the look of it. We didn't like buying it. We didn't like seeing it in the supermarkets. We were very much well, not activist, but we certainly didn't accept animal cruelty when we saw it. We didn't like seeing animals being, um, you know, put to their death in the way they were. But it came to a point where we just decided we're not eating meat anymore. It
Mm,
just it's not good for us. It's not good for the animals. We're not doing that anymore.
yeah.
But for some reason we continued with the dairy, and I think that was because back in, when we were in our 30s, like 20 years ago, it wasn't as easy as it is today to become vegan. There was a lot of we were still eating a lot of corn products which had eggs in them,
Mm,
and things like that. So, you know, we were eating tofu and things like that as a kind of substitute for the meat. Um, but we weren't very good. We weren't learned. We didn't have very much knowledge of how to be
mhm.
vegan or even vegetarian back then. It was kind of it was a learning experience through
Yeah.
our 30s to really understand what vegetarianism meant health wise. We knew what it meant to cut out the meat, but we were still eating stuff from live animals, and that it didn't sit well with us, but at the same time, um, we tolerated it, I
Mhm.
suppose. But we always had an intention of transitioning to vegan. That was our ultimate goal.
Yeah.
It was just at the time, probably at the time we were doing it, it just wasn't right, you know. Um, so it wasn't really until we got to our late 30s and we decided, okay, we've had a good life here in Sheffield. It's kind of we've outlived it a little bit now. It's time to move somewhere else. So we were looking for somewhere warmer, somewhere more where we could do outdoor stuff and have a better quality of life, really. So we were looking around England for some places where we could down to the south or whatever. But we thought, why not be braver? Why not be adventurous? So we decided we were going to emigrate to Australia,
Big
ten
move.
thousand miles across the pond.
Yeah.
Let's really go for it. Um, so we thought, is this the right time to go vegan? And we thought, well, we wanted to do a bit of traveling because we had always been very frugal with our money. We had hardly any holidays. We were very minimalist. We didn't spend a lot. We didn't buy things we didn't need. So we were very conscious, I suppose, of our behaviours and that impacted the environment. But we thought, well, this is probably going to be a once in a lifetime opportunity to travel to Australia, and so we decided to make it a fun journey by going the long way around. So
Mhm.
we did a lot of traveling, um, and the places we were looking at in the guidebook, that you must go to kind of guidebooks, was some of the out of the way places. And we thought, we're never going to be able to be vegan in those places.
Mm.
It's going to be very, very difficult to get vegan food. Are we going to be healthy enough? We're backpacking around the world. Is this actually going to benefit us? Because we don't want to be ill. Um, so we made a conscious decision to stay vegetarian, bordering on vegan where we could be,
Mm.
and that was for health and for the animals at that time. Um, but when we got to Australia, the time was right. It was perfect. We'd got a house, we'd got settlement,
Mm.
we'd got all the amenities to be vegan, and I think that's important because you know a lot of the vegan stuff that we eat isn't always you know, flavorful, especially if you're not if you're not eating a lot of ultra processed foods. And so you need a good stash of like spices and herbs and condiments and, things like this to make it more exciting. Um, and obviously somewhere to eat it and things like that, rather than eating out a lot. So when we landed in Australia, not straight away, but a couple of years into it, when we were settling in and starting a business and whatnot, um, we did transition fully to being vegan, and that was probably the best move we ever made. It was a lot healthier. It felt better. It felt good to us that we were, being ethical and fully ethical, actually. But then we went a step further, and we had to do that for good reason, because it was very stressful moving to Australia. It was more stressful than we ever thought it could be.
Mm-hmm.
And main reason for that was we were so far away from family back home.
Yeah.
And I had two aging parents who had got chronic illnesses. Um, and I was trying to support them from Australia while setting up a business, while, understanding the culture in Australia. And it became incredibly stressful for me. My dad had got cardiovascular disease. So he was a heavy smoker. He didn't particularly have a great diet. And over maybe kind of a 10-year period, he rapidly declined
Mm.
towards the end. But it was gradual first and rapid at the end. So he had to have lots of bypasses. He was having lots of heart attacks, and had to have his leg removed above the knee because it was just getting a lot of blockages. So it was a difficult time. I kind of went over the time when he had his leg taken off, and it was so traumatic. He wasn't so bothered. He was kind of trying to be really jovial, and he was incredibly resilient, bless him. But for me, going over by myself, knowing what was going to happen, and then seeing that, and then seeing him being condemned to a wheelchair, a guy who was incredibly independent, that took a lot out of me, I suppose, more than it did him. And then obviously declined throughout the period. And then in 2019, I got a call saying that he'd finally passed away. And it was awful because I'd only spoke to him the day before. And it was kind of like, this is surreal. This can't be possible. I never even believed it for hours. I thought somebody was just having a laugh, because my dad was always joking. That's how he coped with things.
Yeah.
That was his way of coping. And I thought, obviously, I knew that couldn't be possible. People just don't joke about these things. But it was the worst moment of my life. It was the most traumatic period having to go over, because I was the one that was responsible for his affairs and dealing with his affairs. And so it was a very difficult time of dealing with all that. And I came back with post-trauma stress from that. So for weeks, I couldn't do very much at all. In fact, months, I was just still not coping very well. And that's unusual for me. I'm the one that helps people build resilience, but I couldn't. I don't know. I just lost the plot because he was my rock. Um, Only then, I mean, I didn't realize at the time, but I was also suffering with an autoimmune disease.
Gosh.
For 4 years, I was suffering with an autoimmune disease. I never knew about it. I just knew I'd got these odd symptoms. Nobody really knew why, and they couldn't diagnose it. But the year after he died, I got diagnosis. And again, that was another bombshell. Being told that you've got a chronic illness, Karen, you could lose your sight. And you're going to be on medication and seeing experts for every 3 months for the rest of your life. And I were like, you're joking, right? You've got to be kidding. Where's all that come from? And I think that came from the stress. The stress, yeah, we have a genetic weak link when we've got an autoimmune disease. And, I'd already got a congenital kind of legal blindness in the other eye. And obviously that's where the autoimmune decided to attack. But the epigenetics of what was going on at the time, the amount of stress I was dealing with, and the fact that I was eating an ultra processed vegan diet at the time,
Mhm.
a lot of salt, sugar, and fat. It was you know full on. I think that was one of the big two of the big triggers to my autoimmune disease, unfortunately. On the verge of 2022, I was on the verge of losing mum. She was about to pass away. I was still in Australia. I couldn't go over to the funeral or anything. But I was doing some training, local training, and I went to the local library. I needed a mission because I was still suffering at that point. I was suffering from dad. I was suffering from the autoimmune diagnosis. And now I was losing mum. So I was losing the most important people in my life, really. And I went to the library and I didn't know what I wanted to find, but I did know that I needed to mitigate my risk of more disease. I've got a family, a background of um, heart disease, cardiovascular disease, cancers, as a lot of people do, I know.
Mm.
And I needed to mitigate that risk of getting disease. And my diet wasn't, like I say, I was vegan, but I wasn't a particularly healthy one. And I needed to do something. And I didn't know what. I didn't know what the mission was going to be, but I knew I needed to have a calling. I need to have something to get me out of this place and have something bigger than myself to be concerned about.
Mhm.
So I went to the library, and the first book, honestly, the first book I came across was this book, and it was called Prevent and Reverse Heart
Ah,
Disease. You know
Dr.
that one?
Esselstyn. Yep.
The Revolutionary Scientifically Proven Nutrition-Based Cure, and I've got to say that was a wow moment. That was a big eye opener for me in terms of thinking, wow, what is this stuff? I've never heard of it. I've never heard that you can possibly reverse disease. And, my background is health psychology. I've been in the business for 2 decades. How did I not know that you can actually reverse disease? And this has been around since the 80s. This is not new stuff,
Mhm.
but I just wasn't in those circles. I wasn't privy to this information. And I felt quite angry, actually,
Yeah.
that I could have helped dad, I could have helped mom, and there's things we can do about it. And it kind of got my goat a little bit, pardon the pun,
Mm.
because I thought, well, I can't do anything about the past. The past is the past, but I have an autoimmune disease, and I still have risk of contracting cancers and heart disease. So I sat down and I had to be back. And honestly, I had to be back. I'd only got 45 minutes for lunch. And I had to be back. My students were waiting, and I nearly did go over time because I started reading this book and I couldn't put it down. And I actually took it out of the library, and I was still reading it when I got back to the training room. And when I got home, I said to Paul, I've got to have this book. I've got to have my own version because I want to write in it. I want to pilfer from it. I want to do what I need to do to really know what's going on here and to read some more about it and get to know it. And in this book, there was so much information and resources and references of other
Mhm.
things like the China study and all sorts of other kind of great studies that I wanted to look at. So I was my head was in the research for a good few months after that, looking into all that. Um, I even bought the book because there is a few recipes in there, which is great. And I think that's what we need when we're changing our diet is we need recipes.
Right.
And so I got recipes from that book, but then I realized that his wife and daughter had done a cookbook. And so I bought the cookbook as well. And that was amazing because I could just, there's some great. So what basically, if nobody knows what this is about, it's about transitioning to a whole food, plant-based vegan diet, right? And and it were quite different to being a vegan. It was actually that you use a lot of whole foods and you cook from raw foods. beans, legumes, seeds, nuts, fruit and veg. And I again, it was a new thing to me. I'd never actually eaten that kind of diet before, but I did have to convince Paul, my partner, because he was kind of like skeptical. He's a scientist, so he was quite skeptical. He'd never heard of it either. But he was quite skeptical and said, "No, is this just another fad? Is this just another kind of people putting out something out there that isn't true?" And I said, "No, honestly, you've got to read it. You've got to read the book."
Yeah.
And I gave him a load of kind of abstract research papers that I'd read, and he was convinced too. He was fully on board. The day before it was my 51st birthday coming up, and the day before we transitioned, we were having quite a heated debate. Paul's an all or nothing. If he's made his mind up, he's in there 100%. Whereas I'm more, I want to take my time, I want to kind of transition slowly. I
Hmm.
want to kind of work it out and see how it pans out.
Yeah.
Well, this caused this kind of heated debate about, you know, he wanted to do that. He wanted to go all in. But it was
Mhm.
the day before my 51st birthday. And I'm kind of like, but
Like,
what about all these
no cake.
pizzas?
Yeah.
Yeah, and cake and biscuits. And what about all this stuff? We got cupboards full of ultra processed food and crisps and tasty hummus and all sorts of things. And we were like, but what are we going to do with all this stuff? Because we weren't, going to waste it. We weren't people that wanted to waste stuff. It was part of our ethics of, you
Yeah.
know, not throw, Anyway, we made a pact and we negotiated. So we did get rid of the free oils because on this diet you don't eat free oils. No oil is healthy. But you can eat it in avocados and nuts and tofu and things like that. So we got rid of all the things that were ultra processed food. We had a cupboard full of crisps. Although they were vegan, they just weren't healthy crisps.
Yeah.
Um, so we got rid of those things, but we took them to the food bank and things like that. So um, we tried to find a place for them where people who really needed them could have them. We didn't feel great about that, to be honest, because we felt we were passing on the
Hmm.
gift of death, I suppose, to other people because but anyway, they needed it a lot more than we did. So we got round it that way. Um, so that's where we transitioned then fully over a little bit of time because we had to again get used to a new diet that now was not only for the health and the animal ethics, but now we were really getting into the movement of we've got a planetary crisis here, and this is one of the best diets you can have for a planetary crisis. So all round it, I'm kind of back to where I was when I was younger, like the 5 R's, um, reusing, recycling, refusing, and repurposing, and all that kind of stuff. That's going to benefit all those three things.
Yeah.
And then I thought, right now, I've got to help other people with this. So that's where I started my business of helping people to transition from meat and fish, from eggs and dairy, from
Mhm.
ultra processed food, and then from overeating all things, which ties into the planetary health as well. So that's where I know it was a long journey, Kimberly. Sorry about that, but
That's okay.
that's kind of where we're at. That's where I'm
Yeah.
at. I feel like I've come full circle.
Well, great,
Um,
because I've already got a question for you.
okay,
Uh,
okay, marvelous.
so when you were talking about you found Dr. Esselstyn's book and you read it and you were like, I've got to change, I've got to be eat differently now. And you share it with Paul and he goes, yep, okay, we're gonna do it. And he wants to go all in. And then you guys do it. How can people who read those books. They get the knowledge. They've watched the documentaries. They've listened to these doctors talk. Dr. Esselstyn has great talks about all of this.
Yeah,
And you
absolutely.
listen to it and you start taking in that knowledge and you know how to pair food and you know what you're supposed to be eating, what your body wants and craves, but you just can't do it. How do you help someone, or what are some like suggestions you have for someone who's like, I know it, but for some reason there's like a block and I just keep going back to that Ben and Jerry's, oat milk ice cream, or yeah, or the
Yeah.
the Beyond Burgers and stuff. Like, yeah, what would you say to a person to help them kind of get through whatever that block is?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that's normal.
Mm,
That is common. And, people, I don't work immediately like that. I often want to have other things. I want to go back to things.
mhm.
And that's not a big deal. And I think when you make it a big deal, that's where you're going to start getting anxious and stressed about it. And that's where you are going to definitely fall off the wagon, full stop,
Mm,
because you're going to kind of beat yourself up and think, well, I can't do it. I'm a failure. There's no point in continuing with it because it's not for me, obviously.
yeah.
Whereas I think if you can start with a mentality, whatever diet or whatever change you're making, if you can plan a little bit and think, this is likely to happen.
Mm,
What will I do about it? What can I do to mitigate that risk if I do, relapse?
right.
And have a sense of acceptance that if it does happen, and it happens to all of us, it's happened to me many times, is to say to yourself, well, it's happened, what am I going to do about it? And take the relapse as a chance to feedback to yourself of, well, what happened? What do I need to do
Yeah.
differently? What do I need to do better to get? Because I really do have a cause, and I think that's the important thing for people,
Mm,
whether it's the animals, whether it's your health, or whether it's the planet. I think for me, and a lot of people that I talk to, is that the cause is what keeps them there. The why, having that, people talk about having this big why.
mhm.
Because you can then think, right, if I'm doing it for if I'm doing it for the animals, I'm going to watch some videos on animals being slaughtered,
Yeah.
and I'm going to put myself through that because every time I watch those videos, it really makes me angry and it makes me want to be a vegan and a whole food vegan or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, and so have something like that where, watch some, if you're doing it for the planet, watch some YouTube videos on, the burning and the hurricanes
Mm,
and the people being, killed in floods and fires and things like that. Because and animals, I mean, read some statistics to yourself. Have some ways of reminding yourself of why you're doing this. I
mhm.
think there. And another thing, I've always been very fortunate in having excuse me, I've had support throughout my whole life from Paul. We've always buddied each other.
Yeah.
And we've always been accountable to one another.
Mm,
And we've always done things together. It's just amazing how, when one of us does something, the other one kind of wants to do it. Um, and, I think it's important to have support. If you don't have that kind of buddyship, join a community or, have some professional help support
mm,
that you can call on where it will help you to talk it through and reflect and understand what went wrong there and what could be better and what you can do differently.
yeah.
I think that's it. You've got to understand the behavior.
Mm,
You've got to understand and define it, understand what you're doing, why you're doing it, where it could go wrong. And then if it does go wrong, why did it go wrong?
mm,
Because
yeah.
without all that and really being specific about it, really being honest about it, because if you don't, you're just going to end up back where you were again. And I think that's where support comes in because you can be accountable and
Yeah.
have that support. You can bounce that off that other person and they can kind of give you an objective view of, are you sure?
Mhm.
Is it possible to do that? You know, that kind of thing. So, yeah, it may be that people didn't have certain skills, and that's about building skills. It may be that you are going back to the Ben and Jerry's simply because it's tastier. Well, maybe you don't have the skills to make what you've got tastier. And
Mhm.
that would be again about getting some good recipes and listening to online people talking about whole food plant-based diets and how they make them interesting and tasty and
Yeah.
fulfilling and, you know, meaningful. The interesting thing is when we are away from certain foods for a particular length of time, that will be different for different people.
Mhm.
Your taste changes. My
Mm.
taste has changed dramatically. I can't go back to eating free
Yeah.
oils or ultra processed foods because I don't like it anymore.
Mhm.
You know, the brain chemistry changes.
Hmm.
But you have to be away from it for a little while because otherwise you're going to keep getting that dopamine fix
Yeah.
each time you use it and you're not really going to wean yourself off it. Do you know what I mean? Um, So I would say, and like I said before, investing in some good recipe books.
For sure. Yes.
There's tons of free ones online. My God, if you go online these days on Instagram or wherever you go,
Yeah.
everyone is offering freebies and
Mhm.
take the freebies. And
Yeah.
if you like the freebies, go buy the books, you know? Because without that, I think I would have been stuck personally. I'm not a person that can. Paul's great. He can be. He's a great improviser. He can just take a bunch of stuff and make something great with it. Whereas I have to have a bit of a structure
Mhm.
to follow something and kind of
Yeah.
to give me a starting point at least. And then if I don't like something in the recipe, I will kind of throw it out and put something similar, but
Mhm.
something that I like in there, you
Yeah.
know? So yeah, I think they would be my tips.
Okay. Well, who's your favorite? Like, do you have a favorite cookbook or a favorite chef or author of cookbooks that you'd like for other people to check out because they're so good?
Well, certainly if it depends whether you're vegan or vegan whole food, but if you're vegan whole food, I would definitely look at the cookbooks from the Esselstyns
Mm-hmm.
because they are great kind of uh, yeah, they are really wholesome meals that will keep you
Mm-hmm.
full for longer, and you know you lose a lot of weight. So that's just the thing to be prepared for. You
Yeah.
do lose weight on these diets, even though you're eating more. You kind of lose weight because they're so low in calories.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what else? I've got a bunch of stuff. I buy a lot of Kindles, but I would say I dip in and out of them
Mm-hmm.
because I don't have any one particular. Um, yeah, I don't have any particular one particular book, I would say. I just like
Okay.
to rummage around online and if you know, I'll because there's so much out there right now, you know.
Yeah.
And I've done a lot of diets in the vegan vein, but because of my autoimmune disease, I've done a lot of because we get a lot of inflammation, and that's what causes flares and triggers more disease and damage to our tissues and organs and things. So I have done a lot of fasting diets and managing my inflammatory response with anti-inflammatory diets.
Mm-hmm.
So I've had to kind of look broad and wide
Yeah.
um, to help me with that. So I've got a lot of resources, but if anyone does want help with that, I'm happy to share some of my resources that I've got here. And I've got a lot of recipes, but they're all kind of in a folder on my
Mm-hmm.
computer. And but I'm happy to share them with anyone who wants some help or wants some support to make their diet a bit more interesting. For
Yeah.
sure.
Awesome. Also, since you mentioned not just Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn, but his wife Anne and their daughter Jane, they have a YouTube channel where they cook together. And Anne is
Yes,
such a hoot, and Jane is so much fun. And you put them together, and it's a really good time. And the recipes are incredibly healthy, like you were saying.
they are.
Their
They
focus
are.
is so much on really like really taking care of yourself and nourishing
Yeah.
with food. So, yeah, I love that. And they're fun. So now you're also kind of engaging and you feel like you're kind of hanging out with friends while you're making the food, watching the video. Um,
Yeah.
So I thought
Yeah.
I'd throw that out there. The inflammation thing, it seems
Yeah.
like it seems like even those who don't have who haven't been told that they have an autoimmune disease, like there's just so much inflammation. Yeah,
Absolutely.
everybody's like, "Oh, my joints hurt. Oh, my back hurts. I'm sore here. Brain fog," and they're not making the connection of like how much of what they're consuming is contributing to that. Um,
Yeah,
so do you
absolutely.
work with
It's
people who are dealing with this type of chronic illness, and how you help people kind of manage that, or tell me about the work that you do?
yeah. So the work that I do is I'm a behavioral change specialist. So my background is health psychology. I've always loved, even from a young age, like I said, I was a shy kid and I didn't speak a lot. But when I did speak, I knew what I was talking about, right? So a lot of my teachers would call me quietly confident.
Mhm.
But that meant I was super shy, you know, and I didn't like to disturb people's flows or interrupt or anything like that. And so, but I was a good observer of behaviour, and I learned through watching people,
Mhm.
and that carried me through right through. And I think that's why I headed into psychology because I really felt I understood people. I wanted to learn more about understanding people. Of course, that's why I did psychology, but. So my background was my real interest was always behavioral psychology, the reward and punishment aspect and classical conditioning
Mm,
and that kind of things, where we kind of don't always do things because we want to do things. We do it through habitual means. And they become very automated when we've done them a few times. And
mm,
so I was interested in all that kind of stuff where I could help people at a behavioral level, which didn't mean I had to know about everything and all things. Like when I'm working with people with cardiovascular disease or cancers or autoimmune disease, I don't need to know the ins and outs of their disease. I just need to help them change their diet right now.
mm,
That's my focus and what I'm interested in. So it doesn't matter what they're eating. We have to kind of understand why that's affecting them and why
mm,
it's damaging their health and what is it that we're going to be changing and how are we going to be changing it and for what reason. So yeah, absolutely. I think I read a statistic recently that it is going to be one of if not the leading cause of death, or certainly the second biggest cause of death after heart disease, cardiovascular disease, inflammation, any
mm.
kind of inflammation, because it's at the core of every disease that anyone has.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, with autoimmune diseases in particular, is that you get systemic treatment, you get immunosuppressant medication, which will tackle and protect the organ that's been damaged, because it kind of just takes out all your lymphocytes, so you don't
Mhm.
have any your white blood cells go down. But and that's for me an occurring ongoing process, and it is for most people with autoimmune diseases. It's a lifetime of being immunocompromised. But for you know, for a lot of people, they have localized inflammation in other areas of their body, which are part of that of being immunocompromised or having an autoimmune disease. It's not actually necessarily damaging that part of the body, but it will do if you don't manage and tackle
Mm,
the inflammation. So for me, I've been tackling and battling with a lot of inflammation on my skin and in my throat and in my mouth, which could or couldn't be related to the autoimmune disease. It's very difficult because autoimmune diseases can affect many different parts of the body, depending on. I mean,
mm.
there are over 80 different kinds of autoimmune diseases. So
Wow.
it, it, it each one has its own. While it's the same kind of, you have it's genetic and epigenetic in terms of how it gets expressed. they're quite different in terms of the organs and the tissues of the body that they affect. And so it's hard to know whether that's part of your autoimmune disease, part of you being immunosuppressed, or whether it's something else.
Mm,
And I'm constantly getting new, challenges to deal with my
hmm,
health, which seem to pop up out of absolutely nowhere. I'm very spontaneous, and then I go through months and months and months of trying to resolve that.
mm.
Um, and then we resolve that, and then another one pops up. So
Oh,
it's kind of an
that's
ongoing
frustrating.
debate, but it really is, and people are in a lot of pain and suffering as a result of this because we haven't got a treatment for all.
Right.
That will help everyone.
Hmm.
But diet is one of those things that can help everyone. In some shape or form. I'm not saying it's a cure. I'm not saying it's going to reverse your disease,
Right.
but it's going to go a long way to keeping you healthy, and it certainly has for me. Um, I've certainly been a lot healthier and a lot in the mind as well as the body, I would say.
Mm,
You know, I
yeah.
feel clean eating, clean living, is part and parcel of taking good care of ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm. It's so interesting the way that when we look at, I'm thinking myself, my husband, but also just kind of looking here in the US, food is, well, everywhere I'm sure food is like a thing for people, but it seems like people are so addicted to the the standard American diet, right? The ultra processed food, like it has the word American in it. Um, it's so American to eat like shit,
They've
and
colonized it.
sometimes, when I talk to people, it's so ingrained in them that, like, no, this is, I'm supposed to eat this, or even just from the animal perspective, not even thinking about the ultra processed food that has all kinds of additives in it that make us addicted to it. But just the idea that we can't change because we're supposed to eat animals. And it's interesting to watch people who do watch documentaries or who read a
Mm,
book like Dr. Esselstyn's or Dr. McGregor or Dr. Gregor's or even T. Colin Campbell, and then they go, oh, like like this almost they can change.
mm,
And then
mm,
others will read it and they'll know it and they'll be friends with vegans and they'll hear about it and they can just put up a wall. And
mm.
it's humans are so interesting in the way that our behavior changes, doesn't change, does a mix of both. And it's so fascinating to me. And I totally get why you wanted to
It is.
dedicate your life to studying it and figuring it all out.
Yeah, well, interesting. In health psychology, we have a model for that, and it's called the cycle of change. It's called the trans-theoretical model of change. And people will go around this cycle of change. It was originally designed, or sorry, studied, I suppose. It was already for smokers who stopped. They were self-smokers. They were self-stopping smokers, if you know what I mean. So they didn't
Yeah.
have any help. They didn't have any patches or nicotine, chewing gum, or anything. They quit themselves. And so with the people who kind of designed this model around that said, hey, how come these people can just quit and other people are hooked on nicotine for life and they
Mhm.
won't give it up? And so they designed this model. It's a really interesting model. It's called the cycle of change, and it has various segments. So it starts with pre-contemplators, and they are outside the circle. And that means that they are not interested in changing. They have no reason to change. They are, like you say, they put the barriers up, the walls up. Doesn't matter how many times their doctor says, "Hey, you're going to lose your leg if you don't stop smoking." They will continue to do it because they don't believe that smoking is anything anyway related to their blockage in their leg. So they're not really in the cycle of change. They're always on the outside until something happens. And then you've got the first segment, which is what's called contemplating change. And that's where people are weighing up the pros and cons of quitting versus not quitting, and changing diet versus not changing diet. So they may dabble a bit, they may kind of try it and think, oh, that was awful. I remember when I first had olives and avocado, God, I didn't touch them for weeks. It was just, I don't know if I had a bad, kind of something that wasn't kind of quite right
Mhm.
when I bought it, but I didn't get along with it, and people are going to have that because it's a different change in your diet. It's a different taste. It's like giving babies food that they've never had before,
Yeah.
and if you've never had certain foods, you're going to struggle with it. But the idea is you don't stop giving babies that food. You keep giving them more, and they get used to it.
Yeah.
And that's what we have to do when we're changing diet. Is I wouldn't just take the first meal that you have or the first food that you try as an example of I can change. I don't want to change to this anymore. I'm going back to pre-contemplating because that's awful.
Yeah.
You have to, you know, desensitize yourself to those foods. So that's where the pre-contemplation bit is where people will quite, you've got to be careful when you're working with those people because it's challenging, but also they quite quickly will jump back into pre-contemplation if they haven't got the right tools and
Mm.
skills and support to get
Yeah.
them round to the next segment. And the next segment is, and we do have like strategies for each segment to help people move around that
Mm.
cycle. So that's where I say, if you are struggling, get some support. Get some support from behavioural strategists like myself or somebody who can help you implement diets. Not all dietitians are good at implementing because they just often just give you a diet plan and say, hey, go and make something of it. Stick to it, would you, for a
So
week or two?
helpful.
But they're not great. They don't have a lot of training that we have in the psychology world of how do you help people to implement these diets. And so I would say, so the next segment is, and I know we haven't got a lot of time left. So the next segment is determination preparation, and that's where people are actually making changes.
Mhm.
So in the contemplation phase, they're probably not, they're just thinking about it, thinking about what are the consequences of this? What will I lose if I do that?
Yeah.
And it often is what they're going to lose rather than what they're going to gain. So it's
Mhm.
often on the negative, glass half empty kind of thing.
Yeah.
So you have to get them round to the next bit, which is the determination preparation. And that's where they are getting prepared to change and then determined to change. And often they do make changes there because they've got their why and the purpose
Mhm.
and the meaning for wanting to do it. And then they take action, and that's the next segment. And they're usually in the action stage, which is when they've fully moved, transitioned, or doing the behavior they wanted to do. And they're usually in that state for 6 months if if it's working for them.
Mhm.
And then they move into the maintenance phase where they become a long-term user of whatever is the
Okay.
behavior change. And so there's a whole cycle. At any time they can exit if they, for whatever reason. Like my
Mhm.
dad, he did quit smoking when he was told he was going to lose his leg, and he couldn't have the operation otherwise. He had the operation. He stayed abstinent for about 2 or 3 weeks, and
Mhm.
the depression kicked in, and he lost his soulmate, so he went back to it, and that was it. And that's what kind of triggered more heart attacks. So, but it's at that point when people have quit, that's where they need the most help.
Mhm.
Where they've just started a new diet or just made a behavioural change. They're the risky periods where
Yeah.
relapse is going to happen if they don't have some relapse prevention strategies,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
So yeah,
Thank you for that. That's so interesting. And I love
yeah,
that throughout this whole conversation, you have reminded all of us get support. Make sure
yes,
you've got
absolutely,
people to be accountable to who are lifting you up, inspiring you to keep going. And that is so wonderful. And I really appreciate that.
yeah,
Karen, I've got one more
appreciate.
question for you.
Yes.
How does hummus show up in your life?
Well, hummus is an interesting one because I loved hummus when I was a processed, ultra-processed vegan. I loved jalapeno. It's very spicy, very hot. Since I've found out I got an autoimmune disease and I've been managing inflammation, I've had to cut out alliums and chili. So a lot of garlic, onions, leeks, that kind of thing, and chili. And so I've not been able to spice my hummus anymore. But I'm on a really restricted diet right now, and I could have beetroot because we're introducing various chemicals that I might be sensitive to and eliminating others. But I did have a wonderful, I made, I think Paul made it actually, but it was, we cook chickpeas, we cook beetroot, and there was a lot of things I would have liked to have put in it, but I couldn't. But it was a beautiful, I don't know if you do beetroot hummus,
have.
but it's an amazing color. It's
Yeah.
just so beautiful. I couldn't put garlic in. I did salt and pepper in, and I put a bit of. I couldn't have citrus, so I put a bit of cream of tartar in.
Okay.
And yeah, it was actually the most delicious hummus I've ever had. I've got to say.
Okay, that was a nice surprise.
But I'll tell you what, that's what we're talking about. That's where, when your taste changes, when you've been on restricted diets for a period of time, you accept it is what it is, and you start to enjoy that food. And I was so surprised, ultra surprised at liking it. Yeah, I'm definitely going to make that a lot more. So yes, beetroot hummus.
Lovely. Yeah, I've never had it. I have definitely seen photos of it, and you're right, it is gorgeous. Absolutely gorgeous. Yeah,
Yeah,
you've inspired me to give it a try. So next time I'm making
absolutely.
hummus, I'm gonna throw some beetroot in there.
You gotta do
Yeah.
that. You really are. I love beetroot, so.
Erin, this has been wonderful. Thank you so, so much for your time tonight. I cannot wait for my listeners to hear this. I know that they're going to take as much out of it as I did. And again, just thank you so much. I appreciate all that you
Yes.
do for the world,
Thank you.
for the people, for the animals. And yeah, thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure, Kimberly. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Welcome back. Karen's guidance is so real and practical. I feel like I can tackle some things that have been falling flat for me over and over again. One of the tips that stuck out to me was prepare for the tough moments, know how you'll respond, and what you can lean on. To connect with Karen, visit her website, KarenBartle, BARTLE.com. I hope you found this episode helpful and inspiring. Please subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. And if you're loving it, please give Did You Bring the Hummus a 5-star rating and leave a review. It's an easy way to keep supporting the show. Be sure to share these episodes with your friends. If you're finding something good here, they will too. If you're a vegan or know a vegan who would be a great fit for the podcast, follow the Be a Guest link in the show notes. Fill out the quiz and I'll be in touch. Get on my mailing list and stay up to date on all things Did You Bring the Hummus. Get more info on how you can sign up for a meditation, one of my programs, or to support the podcast via the links in the show notes. Follow me on Facebook and Instagram at Did You Bring the Hummus, and visit my website, didyoubringthehummus.com, for more information about me, updates on what I'm working on, new podcast episodes, and all things vegan. Finally, I would love to hear from you. What do you need help with? Is there a topic you want to hear covered on a future episode? DM me on Instagram or send me an email at info@didyoubringthehummus.com. Thanks for listening.